I never imagined a parent-teacher conference could make me feel like I was back in high school, standing in front of a principal's desk for something I didn't do. But that's exactly how it felt the moment I stepped into Miss Rebecca Turner's classroom on Thursday afternoon. The air smelled faintly of dry erase markers and stale coffee, and the fluorescent lights flickered just enough to irritate my already tired eyes. I had just finished a double shift at the auto shop. My hands still smelled like oil, no matter how many times I washed them. But I was here because my 8-year-old son, Caleb, had been quieter lately, more anxious, and I wanted to know why. I had no idea the answer would hit me like a punch to the chest. Miss Turner didn't even look up when I walked in. She just flipped through a stack of papers as if I were invisible. When she finally lifted her eyes, her expression was so cold and tight it physically stopped me from taking another step. "You're late," she said, even though I was 5 minutes early. Her tone was clipped, sharp, dripping with judgment in a way that made me instantly self-conscious about my work boots and grease-stained jeans. I forced a polite smile and apologized anyway, trying to ignore the burn of embarrassment crawling up my neck. As I sat down, I noticed two other teachers lingering in the back of the room, whispering to each other. Their glances kept darting in my direction, their smirks small but unmistakable. A knot formed in my stomach. I didn't know what Miss Turner had told them, but whatever it was, they clearly found it entertaining. She slid a thin folder toward me as if it were contaminated. "We need to discuss Caleb's performance," she said flatly. "He's missing assignments." Again. The word again was emphasized like a slap. I frowned, confused. Every night, Caleb and I sat together at the kitchen table doing homework. It was our routine, maybe our favorite part of the day. "I'm sorry, but that doesn't make sense," I said gently. "Caleb turns in everything. We work on it together." Miss Turner gave a small, humorless laugh. "Well, unless the assignments are walking themselves to school, someone isn't doing their job." Her eyes flicked to my clothes again, and the insult hit harder than she probably intended. Or maybe she intended it exactly. I clenched my jaw, trying not to let my frustration show. "Could I see which assignments are missing?" I asked. My voice sounded painfully calm, even to me. She flipped through the file like she was performing for an audience, reporting Caleb's failures one by one. But none of the pages looked like Caleb's handwriting. The worksheets were filled with scribbles, the names barely legible. My confusion deepened into concern. "Ma'am, this isn't Caleb's work," I said quietly. "These aren't his papers." She shrugged in a way that made me feel small. "Perhaps if you were more present," she said, "you'd know what your son is handing in." Those words hit me right in the gut. I work 2 jobs, one at the shop, one doing delivery runs at night. I do it so Caleb has shoes that fit, a bed that's comfortable, and a life that feels stable. But to her, I was nothing more than a stereotype. I swallowed hard. "I'm very present," I said, heat rising behind my eyes. "Every day." She didn't even pretend to care. Instead, she turned to the 2 other teachers and gave them a look. One of those silent glances full of shared judgment people give when they think you're too stupid to understand. The taller teacher whispered something to the other, who stifled a laugh behind her hand. My stomach twisted as Miss Turner leaned forward, her voice lowering to a patronizing softness. "Caleb needs structure," she said. "Consistency. A father who actually shows up." The words hung in the air like poison. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. All I could think about was Caleb's little backpack, hanging by the door every morning, and how he always looked up at me and said, "You'll pick me up later, right, Dad?" He trusted me. I never missed a pickup, not once. I tried to redirect the meeting, to keep my voice even. "I came here to help," I said. "If there's a misunderstanding or a mix-up with assignments, we can clear it up. I just want to support my son." "But Miss..." Turner rolled her eyes so dramatically, it felt like an act. "Jordan, we see parents like you all the time," she said, leaning back with a smug sigh. "Always making excuses, always promising change, but it's always the kids who pay for it." Before I could respond, I heard it. One of the teachers whispered, not quietly enough, "Deadbeat dads always think they're doing enough." My heart stopped. My vision blurred for a moment as anger surged through me, hot and humiliating. I wanted to defend myself, I wanted to protect Caleb from whatever judgment she was projecting onto him because of me. But above everything else, I felt a deep, sinking realization. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a target, and I had just walked straight into the center of it. The next morning, I showed up at Caleb's school, determined to clear the air. I didn't want another confrontation, but I also wasn't going to let anyone label me something I wasn't, especially not in front of other staff. The hallways buzzed with the usual morning chaos. Lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking, kids shouting greetings to each other. I held a folder filled with Caleb's actual homework. Every worksheet, every spelling list, every neatly written math problem. I hoped it would be enough to straighten everything out. I had no idea I was walking straight into a trap. As I reached the main office, I spotted Miss Turner talking to the school receptionist, Linda, who was usually warm and friendly. But today, Linda's eyes slid past me with a stiffness I wasn't used to. Miss Turner glanced over her shoulder and smirked as if she'd been expecting me. "Oh," she said loudly, "look who's finally here." Her voice echoed off the tile floors, drawing attention from a couple of nearby parents waiting to sign in. I felt their eyes land on me, heavy and judgmental, even though they had no idea who I was. I approached calmly. "I'd like to talk to you about yesterday," I said, holding up the folder. "I brought Caleb's actual homework." But she cut me off, raising her voice theatrically. "Jordan, I already told you yesterday. Excuses don't help Caleb. He needs a stable parent. Someone who doesn't disappear for days at a time." A couple of heads turned. My stomach dropped. She wasn't just criticizing me, she was broadcasting it. Trying to make a scene. Trying to make sure everyone heard her version before I even had the chance to speak. "That's not true," I said, trying to keep my tone level. "I work. That's not the same thing as disappearing." Miss Turner scoffed loudly enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear. "Well, maybe if you spent less time making excuses and more time being a father, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Her arms crossed as if she had already won the argument. It wasn't just unprofessional, it was personal, and I didn't understand why. Linda finally stepped in, her voice hesitant. "Rebecca, maybe this isn't the place." "Oh, please," Miss Turner snapped. "Parents like him need accountability. If he's not doing his job, then we're left to pick up the pieces." She turned back to me with a sour smile. "Isn't that right?" I felt heat rising up my neck, not embarrassment anymore, but anger. I opened the folder and spread the homework across the counter. "These are the assignments we worked on. All of them. Every night. If they aren't getting turned in, then something else is going on." Miss Turner narrowed her eyes, her jaw clenching for a split second before she laughed. "Forged work? Really, Jordan? This is pathetic." I stared at her, stunned. "You think I forged my son's homework instead of just helping him do it?" She shrugged. "I don't know what you do, but I do know Caleb's grades are slipping, and that usually reflects what's happening at home." Her words were sharp and deliberate. Another parent, a man holding a toddler, shifted uncomfortably and glanced at me like I was radioactive. It felt like Miss Turner was painting a caricature of me, and everyone around us was buying it. I took a slow breath. "I'd like to talk to the principal," I said firmly. Miss Turner gave a mocking little gasp. "Oh? Going over my head now?" Then she turned dramatically toward the hallway. "Mr. Harlan," she called out. "We have a parent issue." Principal Harlan walked over with his usual mild confusion, as if stepping into conversations mid-argument was part of his daily routine, which, in a school, it probably was. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked. Before I could speak, Miss Turner jumped in. "Jordan is upset because Caleb has missing assignments and slipping performance. I explained everything yesterday, but he's refusing to take responsibility. He even brought paperwork." She said it like I'd brought counterfeit money. I felt something snap inside me, not violently, just decisively. "I want an investigation," I said, "into where Caleb's assignments are going. These worksheets are completed at home. If they aren't being turned in, there's a reason." Miss Turner laughed under her breath. "Oh, this is rich." But before anyone could respond, a small voice piped up behind us. "Dad?" I turned. Caleb stood there with his backpack half-zipped, looking like he'd wandered into the wrong room. His hair was sticking up in the back from the car ride. His eyes looked confused and scared. "That's what hurt the most," Miss Turner crouched down to his level with a smile so fake it made my skin crawl. Caleb, sweetie, we're just talking about how we can help you catch up. Your dad is having a little trouble understanding. Miss Turner, Caleb interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. I gave you my homework yesterday. The entire office fell silent. Her smile froze. My heart stopped. And in that instant, I knew this wasn't incompetence. It was something much worse. The moment Caleb said those words, the room tightened like a drawn bow. Even Principal Harlan blinked, caught completely off guard by how direct and certain my son sounded. I knelt beside Caleb, trying to keep my voice steady as I asked, "You gave her your homework?" He nodded, small but sure, shifting uncomfortably under all the staring adults. I could tell he felt guilty, like he'd accidentally broken some rule by telling the truth out loud. It made my chest ache. Miss Turner's smile reappeared, thinner this time, like stretched paper. "Caleb, sweetheart," she said softly, "I think you're misremembering. A lot happens during the school day. Sometimes you might think you turned something in when you didn't." Her voice was syrupy, but her eyes were sharp, flicking nervously from me to Principal Harlan. I recognized the tactic instantly discredit the child, keep the narrative intact. It only made me angrier. But I didn't want Caleb caught in the crossfire. Before I could speak, Caleb's brows furrowed. "No," he whispered, with a conviction that startled even me. "I put it on your desk. You were talking to Miss Kelly." His small hands tightened on the straps of his backpack as if anchoring himself. "You said you'd grade it later." A few parents who had been pretending not to listen froze mid-step. Even Linda, who had been determined to stay out of it, looked up sharply from her computer. Everything in the room shifted. Miss Turner stood abruptly and exhaled through her nose, a controlled but unmistakably irritated breath. "This is getting ridiculous," she snapped. "I don't have time for this witch hunt." She stopped herself, eyes darting to Harlan, who was now watching her with a new, unsettling scrutiny. I could almost see him cataloging every inconsistency, every edge in her tone, every defensive gesture. The silence felt heavy, like the air before a storm. I straightened up and placed a hand gently on Caleb's shoulder, guiding him behind me. "Nobody's hunting anything," I said. "We just want the truth." But something in Miss Turner's reaction had already set off the alarms in my head. She wasn't annoyed, she was nervous. And it wasn't the kind of nervous you feel when you're accused unfairly. It was the kind that comes when something is about to collapse. Principal Harlan cleared his throat. "Rebecca," he said carefully, "do you have Caleb's assignments from this week? I can take a look right now." His tone wasn't accusatory yet, but it was close. Too close for her comfort. She stiffened, her jaw flexing before she forced a smile onto her face. I don't have them on me," she said slowly. "They must be in my classroom. I can go check." "You don't need to," someone said from the doorway. We all turned. It was Miss Kelly, the second-grade reading specialist. She looked uncomfortable, like she'd been wrestling with herself in the hallway. "Rebecca," she said quietly, "I saw Caleb put his homework on your desk yesterday. It was right on top of the blue folder." Her voice trembled, but her words didn't. "I remember because you told him you'd look at it after recess." Miss Turner's face drained of color. A crack ran through her composure, jagged and impossible to hide. I felt a pulse of vindication, shamefully satisfying, but it was layered with fear. Because something was wrong. Very wrong. Principal Harlan's expression hardened. "Rebecca," he said, "I think we need to have a private meeting. Right now." She opened her mouth as if to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Her throat worked soundlessly before she finally muttered, "Fine," and marched out of the room. Harlan followed, giving me a look that said, "I don't know what this is, but we're going to find out." I appreciated that, more than he knew. As soon as they disappeared down the hallway, the tension in the office burst like a punctured balloon. Linda approached cautiously. "Jordan," she said, "are you okay?" Her voice was soft, and for a moment I wasn't sure how to answer. Was I okay? I wasn't even sure what okay meant anymore. "I just want what's fair," I said finally. "For Caleb." She nodded, sympathy flickering in her eyes. "Then you're doing the right thing." But something about the way she said it, like she knew more than she could say, lodged in the back of my mind. And that suspicion only grew when she added quietly, "You're not the first parent who's had problems with her." That sentence rattled through me. "What do you mean?" I asked. Linda hesitated, glanced around, then shook her head. I can't say anything else. Not yet. But the superintendent is doing a district-wide performance review soon. And, let's just say, some concerns have already been raised. Before I could respond, the hallway erupted with raised voices. One of them was Miss Turner's. Something was unraveling behind that closed door, and whatever it wasn't small. The raised voices spilling from the conference room door were sharp enough to slice through the hallway's usual morning bustle. Even from several steps away, I could hear Miss Turner's frantic tone rising and falling, alternating between pleading and defensive accusation. Parents slowed as they passed, glancing toward the office like they were trying to solve a mystery without getting caught eavesdropping. I stood beside Caleb, one hand resting on his shoulder, trying to act calm even though adrenaline was buzzing under my skin. He leaned into me quietly, as if he sensed everything we'd held down for weeks was finally cracking open. It felt like the school walls themselves were listening. I was debating whether to take Caleb home for the day when the office door swung open and Principal Harlan stepped out. His face carried a tight, unsettled expression I hadn't seen before, part exasperation, part something darker. Behind him, Miss Turner paced the room like a cornered animal, her hands trembling as she raked them through her hair. Harlan cleared his throat, glanced at me, then down at Caleb, and said, "Jordan, I think it might be best if you stay for a bit longer." His tone was careful, almost apologetic. It made my stomach drop. Something big was happening behind those walls. Linda was about to say something when the front door opened, and a wave of cold air swept through the office. A tall woman in a dark navy blazer walked in with a presence that made every conversation die mid-sentence. She carried a leather binder under one arm, and her ID badge hung from a lanyard that read District Administration. Her eyes were sharp and alert, taking in the silent room with a single sweep. Linda straightened up so fast her chair squeaked. "Superintendent Rayburn," she said, sounding both startled and respectful. "We weren't expecting you until next week. Plans changed," the superintendent replied, her voice calm but edged with authority. "I heard there was an ongoing issue with a staff member. I thought it best to handle the matter directly." Her gaze shifted to me, then to Caleb, then to Harlan. "Let's go inside." She didn't wait for a response. She simply walked toward the conference room like she owned the floor beneath her feet. I felt my pulse spike. For the superintendent to show up now was no coincidence. Something had been set in motion long before today, and Miss Turner's reaction inside that room panicked. Defensive meant she knew exactly what it was. Principal Harlan motioned for me to follow them, and though I hesitated, I nodded and guided Caleb to a chair near the office door. "Stay right here," I whispered to him. "I'll be just a few feet away." He looked scared but nodded, holding his backpack like a shield. When I stepped into the conference room, the air was heavy, like walking into a storm before it breaks. Miss Turner was mid-sentence when she noticed the superintendent enter. Her face blanched, then flushed, then settled into a strained, brittle smile that fooled no one. "Superintendent Rayburn," she said quickly, "this is all a misunderstanding. This parent—" The superintendent raised a hand, silencing her. "Rebecca," she said evenly, "I'm aware of your ongoing performance concerns." The words hit the table like a dropped weight. Miss Turner flinched. "We'll discuss that shortly. For now, I want to hear from everyone involved." When her eyes landed on me, I took a steadying breath and explained everything from the missing homework to the accusations, to Caleb's statement, to Miss Kelly's confirmation. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The truth was already damning enough. The superintendent listened without interrupting, though her expression sharpened at several points, especially when Caleb's honesty was mentioned. When I finished, Miss Turner exploded. "He's lying!" she shouted. "He's trying to save face because he's embarrassed about neglecting his child. That homework was never turned in. He's just looking for someone to blame." Her voice cracked, the desperation showing through the anger. "This is harassment, and I won't stand for it." But the superintendent didn't flinch. "Rebecca," she said, her voice cool, "please sit down. It wasn't a request, and Miss Turner knew it." She sank into her chair like her knees had given out. Then the superintendent opened her binder and slid a document across the table. "Before I arrived," she said, I reviewed the internal reports regarding your classroom. Missing assignments, lost exams, repeated parental concerns, and, she added, turning a page, the footage. Miss Turner's breath hitched. What footage? The superintendent didn't smile. Security footage. From your classroom. She tapped the binder. Including the time-stamped clip from yesterday afternoon. I felt every muscle in my body go rigid. This was the moment everything had been building toward. The moment the truth, whatever it looked like, would finally be dragged into daylight. Miss Turner swallowed hard, her face draining of all color, and then the superintendent said the words that would unravel everything. Rebecca, we saw you take Caleb's homework off your desk and put it into your personal bag. The silence that followed the superintendent's words was so absolute, it felt like the air itself had frozen. Miss Turner stared at her, eyes wide and unblinking, as if she were waiting for the punchline to a joke that would never come. Her lips parted soundlessly, her breath shallow and uneven. I felt my pulse hammering behind my ribs, not out of victory, but out of shock. Caleb had been right. Every suspicion I tried to rationalize away was real. What? What are you talking about? Miss Turner finally choked, her voice shaking. That's impossible. I would never take a child's assignments. Why would I do something like that? The question wasn't defiant, it was pleading, nearly hysterical. She looked to Principal Harlan as if he might rescue her, but he simply lowered his gaze, refusing to play either savior or shield. The superintendent flipped the binder around and slid it toward Miss Turner. It's all here, she said. Time-stamped. Recorded. Logged. You removed several student assignments from your desk, including Caleb's, folded them, and placed them into your personal bag. Then you left early. There is no ambiguity in the footage. Miss Turner stared at the printed still images, her face contorting into something between denial and despair. She let out a hollow laugh, one that didn't sound human. You don't understand, she stammered. I mean, it's not what you think. But every word sounded like it was falling apart before it even left her mouth. The superintendent remained unshaken. Then you can explain, she said calmly. Because right now, the evidence suggests intentional mishandling of student materials, targeted behavior toward a particular child, and falsification of academic records. She paused just long enough for the weight of the accusation to settle, which are all grounds for immediate suspension. Miss Turner's chair screeched backward as she stood suddenly. This is a setup, she cried. Someone must have put those papers in my bag. Maybe him. She pointed at me with a trembling finger. He's been angry ever since I told him the truth about his parenting. He's been out to get me. He probably broke into my classroom. That's enough. Principal Harlan interrupted, his voice firmer than I'd ever heard. Jordan didn't do anything except stand up for his son. And frankly, I've had concerns about your conduct for months. His jaw tightened. You've made this school unsafe for the kids in your classroom. And now we finally have proof. Miss Turner staggered, her legs wobbling. You can't do this, she whispered. You can't just take my career away. The superintendent stood, closing the binder. Rebecca, you've done that yourself. Then she motioned toward the door. An investigator will meet with you this afternoon. For now, you are suspended pending review. Please gather your things and leave the premises. Miss Turner looked at each of us, as if waiting for one of us to change our minds. None of us did. Her breathing hitched again, and then, without another word, she hurried past me and out the door. Her exit was followed by a tense, echoing silence that spilled through the empty conference room. After a moment, the superintendent turned to me. Mr. Hayes, she said gently, I'm sorry you and your son had to experience this. Your concerns were valid, and you handled this with composure. Not all parents would have. The unexpected softness in her tone threw me off balance. I wasn't used to being treated like someone worth listening to in this building. I exhaled slowly, releasing a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Thank you, I said. I just want Caleb to feel safe at school. And he will, she assured me. We will make sure of it. When I stepped out of the conference room, Caleb jumped up from his chair. His eyes were wide, searching mine for answers. I knelt down to his level and smiled softly. It's okay, I told him. Everything's been sorted out. He threw his arms around me in a tight hug, and I felt something in my chest unclench. For the first time in weeks, the pressure was gone. As we walked toward the exit, I noticed other staff watching us, some with sympathy, some with quiet shock that something like this had been happening under their noses. Miss Kelly gave me a small nod of encouragement from down the hall. Linda mouthed, "Good job," when we passed the front desk. Their support felt like a warm blanket after a long winter. But the moment that stayed with me happened just before we reached the door. The superintendent stepped into the hallway, hands folded behind her back. "One more thing, Mr. Hayes," she said. "Caleb is a bright child. None of this reflects on him or on you. I want you to remember that." Her words hit deeper than she probably realized. As Caleb and I walked out into the crisp morning air, I held his hand a little tighter. The truth had finally come out. Justice had finally been served. And for once, I didn't feel like a deadbeat dad.